And frankly put, we have some ability to influence and steer towards those positive possibilities. If you don't try to find the positive option, you're not going to find one. If your brain and your thoughts and your loop always veers towards the negative, that is all you will find. That is really important. Thoughts become things, and that is a constant loop we need to be reminding ourselves of. If you want to be more optimistic, when you have a negative situation, how do you explain it to yourself? If you're hard on yourself or feeling unworthy versus, is this just an accident or a happenstance? This is the Sage Surety podcast with your host, me, Chantal Russo, where the only dues are your ears, not your dignity. In our sanctuary over here, we trade archaic rules for real world insights, swapping gossip for growth and hazing for healing. This is a secret society, ladies. All we ask is trust. So let's go. Happy Thursday. I'm so happy to be back. I hope you guys are doing well and fabulous. So, as you can tell by today's title, A Case for Optimism, we need to talk more about being optimistic, what it means to have optimism. Are you spiritual bypassing? Is that toxic positivity? Why we need it and how it can truly impact all of our lives. And I know if you're a woman, especially if you're a woman of color, you're probably like rolling your eyes and groaning, like, girl, the world is literally a fucking dumpster fire. Yes, it is. Can't even get into that right now. But optimism, no matter where we are as a society, is super, super crucial. And what you can always remember is that people have gone through way worse and they have survived and they've come out on top, and we will also. So let's discuss. So about just over 2 weeks ago now, I went to Conway Hall, which is kind of like a open center, community center type thing in Holborn. And I went to a lecture hosted by them and featuring the author of the book, The Bright Side, Why Optimists Have the Power to Change the World by Sumit Paul-Choudhury, which he's like an astrophysicist turned journalist, which is an absolutely insane career arc, if I do say so myself. But it was super stimulating, and I thought he made a lot of great points about why optimism is so important and why we all need it and how we can all benefit from it. And I think when you hear that off the top, you're like, of course that matters. Of course we all need it, like duh. But it can so quickly go into things like spiritual bypassing and or toxic positivity. And I just really wanted to outline a lot of the notes that I received and just kind of the impact that it made on me. Scratch your brain a little bit to think more about optimism and how you can add it to your own life. The thing is with optimism is it doesn't mean that you just ignore everything that's around you. Of course not, right? Like there are serious things going on in the world. There always has been. And that's a really great point that he mentions as well. But it's also about, even if you don't look at it from a macro point of view, you look at it from a micro point of view, like your own life. Optimism plays a key role because it is just one of many possibilities, and our brain tends to just think of the negative ones, right? Our brains are wired for pattern, our brains are wired for comfort, and they are wired to detect risk and detect danger. And sometimes the pendulum can swing too far the wrong way. So first things first, the future is open and always has many possibilities, and that some of those possibilities can be positive. Easy to deduce the negative ones, but we're here because of positive possibilities. Like I really want that to sink in. When you think of biology and just how, when the sperm chases the egg, how that all comes to be and the rarity of it all, we are literally alive because of positive possibilities. Our health, all the medical transformation and investment and progress we've made over hundreds and hundreds of years, that is all because of positive possibilities and thinking positively. It sounds very like woo and very like existential, but if we need to reach for something bigger to give a more narrow focus in our lives, I don't think that's a bad thing. And frankly put, we have some ability to influence and steer towards those positive possibilities. If you don't try to find the positive option, you're not going to find one. If your brain and your thoughts and your loop always veers towards the negative, that is all you will find. That is really important. Thoughts become things, and that is a constant loop we need to be reminding ourselves of. If you want to be more optimistic, when you have a negative situation, how do you explain it to yourself? If you're hard on yourself or feeling unworthy versus is this just an accident or a happenstance? That's a really good way to determine how your brain and your emotions typically veer to. Do you look at a bad breakup or just a breakup in general as I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, I'll never find my person? Or do you look at a breakup as, you know what, better to spend one day less with someone who's not for me? My person will be for me. They won't have any second guesses about me. They'll be sure about me. I'll be sure about them. And I'm just closer to finding my person. I don't want to be in a relationship where I think it's one way, but it's actually another. I want to be happy to the highest degree, and I can't be happy to the highest degree if I'm with someone who's not happy to the highest degree for themselves. You know what I mean? That is being optimistic. Both situations can feel like they're true, right? You can feel unlovable in that moment. And again, honoring your feelings wherever they're at is very important. This absolutely can change your life, how you determine to look at it and how you take situations that happen to you. Another great point is that optimism doesn't need to hinge on a perfect solution. I feel like this is a really good point because it's like, well, if I don't do this and I don't get this, then, to be optimistic would mean that I get it. And it's like, are you sure that we can't find a middle ground in there somewhere? Like, okay, maybe you're not going to win the Olympic gold medal, but maybe you're going to get silver, or maybe you're going to hit a personal best. Like, is there still some optimism that you can hit, even if it's not the A1 day one, like perfect solution? I thought that was a really good point because I feel like as humans, we have a really bad tendency to just be all or nothing, which does not serve us in any way, shape, or form. And also, life is full of so much gray. If you are always leaning towards black and white, you're missing a lot in the middle, and it's probably making you slightly unhappy because of that thinking as well. Okay, so you're like, Chantel, I hear you. Great idea. But how do I try to even begin being optimistic, and how do I even stay there? And the best advice I can give is you start there. Like, you have to try. It's not something we actively think about doing, but we should and we have to. Like, that is the message. That is the sweet spot. You have to try. What can you flip around? Like if you are rushing to work and you hit an accident or you hit traffic and you're like, oh, this always happens to me. Like, as soon as something's important, I'm late. Like, you can say all things in divine timing. I'm going to get to work when I should. I'm going to try and leave earlier, but I want to get there as safe as possible. Then that's just what it is. Like, also, I feel like part of the lecture that I really liked was acceptance. How can you accept what is? You don't have to love it, but you don't have to let it mean something more than it does. You know what I mean? And I think that's what he was talking about earlier when it's like, do you see these things as just like unfortunate accidents and happenstance? Or do you let it mean something deeper when it doesn't? Or do you let it mean something deeper and more impactful to you as a person when arguably it's not? Reframing. I can reframe, stepping in dog poop or getting to work late, but what about really massive, awful things that are happening in the world? I really like that he said that there are many different frames in which you can look at history and the world. Honestly, I feel like as I'm getting older, just knowing your history becomes more and more important. When you know your history, you know everything. And growing up, it's always kind of beaten into people of color to know your history because who are you learning it from? There's a really great quote that I know I'm going to butcher. Like, it's basically, to paraphrase, it's, are you getting history from the hunter or are you getting history from the lion? Because they're going to have two completely different accounts of history. Both are true, but very different. And I just love that because historically, Black people have definitely been the lion, and knowing your history and knowing real history is crucial. But I'm going off on a tangent. But basically, he says, what historical events have parallels to the ones that we're in the moment, even the hard ones, which proves things do get better and we do move on. He gave a really good example of the big stink in London. So I had no idea about this, also known as the Great Stink. It actually happened in London in 1858, where the Thames became so polluted. For those that don't know, the Thames is the major river that runs through London, with sewage and industrial waste, that the smell became unbearable and basically made central London unlivable. But it forced the government to take massive action, which led to the construction of London's modern sewer system and drastically improved public health and sanitation. That was a terrible situation that then prompted people to do better and be better. And now we have an amazing system in place for that, which basically makes central London an arm and a leg to live in. So there you go. There are a lot of examples like that in history. You can also look at things in an anthological frame or an evolutionary frame. Basically, he was saying find the mind frame that works for you. If you're inclined to base things on history or your own personal knowledge or education, culture, disposition, whatever kind of framing works best for you is what you should focus on when you are trying to be optimistic. I was writing all my notes on the fly, so yeah, I hope that makes sense. Some of the other facts that he mentioned about optimism in general is that children are also being shown fatalism much earlier in life than they ever were before, and thus reducing their wonder and mental flexibility, i.e., feeling hopeless. If you are a parent, I do think that because we have so much exposure to things now, including adults, we know way more now through our phones than we ever did before through TV and other mediums. I do think it is your job as a parent to try and protect some of your child's wonder. That doesn't mean raising them to be quote unquote soft, and you do want their mental fortitude and flexibility to be strong, but showing very intense or them being exposed to very intense situations at a young age when their brain isn't quite there to fully flesh them out and add optimism to it is not ideal. Because the way an adult might look at a bad situation will usually sprinkle in a little bit more optimism and fortitude, mental fortitude, than a child would, because it can be very doom and gloom for children because their worlds are much smaller. So just something to think about. Another fun point was animals are inherently optimistic. It doesn't matter what animal they had studies on. Bumblebees, chickens, dogs, your pet, your darling pet is inherently optimistic. So whenever you feel doubt and dread and very negative, just look at your pet, because I can tell you for a fact, the studies have shown, the data is out there, that they are not thinking that. And they don't want you to think that either. Also, exercise and endorphins does not necessarily equate to a more optimistic person. I love this point because I do feel like that gets thrown out a lot. Like, just exercise, those endorphins, they just get to you. And everyone knows the quote in Legally Blonde, like, happy people don't kill their husbands. And while there is a case for exercise and endorphins, of course, that does not make you necessarily a more optimistic person. Now, that doesn't mean you should cancel your ClassPass membership, but it does mean that just because you're working out 4 or 5 days a week does not mean you're going to be more optimistic. Lots of people work out and have disorders and have really serious body dysmorphia and things like that. That alone is a really great point to just remind you that it doesn't equate. And finally, if you are wildly optimistic about one specific thing, it will likely be negative. So basically, the case for that is, for example, if you're a smoker and you're like, oh, I could stop smoking tomorrow, no big deal. It's that in itself is a very optimistic point of view, and it's a very optimistic opinion, but we know that you're basically talking shit. You're not going to stop tomorrow, and you probably couldn't just like that. Now, people do quit cold turkey, but often not, right? If you gamble, excessive optimism with gambling goes hand in hand, right? You're always waiting for that next hit, and you believe that you can be the exception to the rule, even though we all know the house always wins. There has to be checks and balances with your optimism. This is where we talk about the toxic positivity, the spiritual bypassing. Excessive optimism, aka runaway optimism, isn't healthy either. So just be mindful. We gravitate to optimistic people. Whether we identify as an optimistic person ourselves, we do gravitate towards optimistic people. They are the people we want to call when we've had a bad day. They are the people we want to call when we've had a good day. We also gravitate to optimistic leaders. If you are a leader, a manager, optimism is something that will pay you dividends. It has nothing to do with your job, nothing to do with your role, and could probably impact your career in a really positive way. People gravitate towards optimism. You don't have to be toxic, but we are talking about educated optimism, I think is the best way of putting it, but optimism nonetheless. Optimism is a great political strategy. Think of political leaders over the last 10 to 20 years. There's usually some sort of optimism woven into their campaign. It is something that people love. It is something that people are very inspired by. You look at Obama's entire 2008 campaign, it was all about change and positive change. It was a campaign purely run on optimism, and we know the results of that. So yeah, try and be more optimistic. If you can think of a way to be more optimistic in your life, let me know. Optimism is the key to life, y'all, and it's just going to make us happier. We can't necessarily change the world from going crazy, being crazy, and crazy people electing crazier political leaders. but we can control ourselves. Everything starts with us, and chips make chunks. So try and be a little bit more optimistic today. And if you need to dig deep, I highly recommend you reading the book called The Bright Side: Why Optimists Have the Power to Change the World by Sumit Paul-Choudhury. I loved what he had to say, and I definitely think it's something we could all benefit from. And that is it for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and I hope that I gave you some really good tips on how to be more optimistic. Listen, optimism saves lives. Hopefully, this gives you a little bit of much needed inspiration. Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at The Sage Sorority, all one word. You can follow me on Insta and on TikTok at Chantel Russo. I will talk to you guys next week. Have a good one. Bye.